Well, hey, Connexus Church, welcome to the Connexus Church podcast. My name is Carey, founding and teaching pastor here at Connexus, and we are about to start a brand new series, so we thought we'd bring you a bonus episode. The series is called Know Yourself, a shortcut to who you really are. And, that's one of those questions. You can end up traveling the world or spending your whole life trying to figure out who you are. Well, God definitely has some insights into who you are. Plus, there's an ancient modern assessment called the Enneagram that we are going to explore in this series. It'll help you learn all kinds of things about you. And we hope that 2020 is a year you get to know yourself better. One of my favorite expressions, talk about a lot in this series, is without knowledge of self, there's no knowledge of God. And without knowledge of God, there's actually no knowledge of self. That comes from John Calvin centuries ago. And somebody who's written a lot about the Enneagram is a priest turned speaker and author and therapist, Ian Morgan Cron. And I do a leadership podcast, had the opportunity to sit down with Ian Morgan Cron and interview him. And so this is a conversation that came from my leadership podcast with Ian about the book that he wrote called The Road Back to You. He and Suzanne Stabile wrote that book together. And it's really about the 9 different Enneagram types, how to find yourself in it. And well, you'll learn an awful lot like I did about the Enneagram. So I hope you enjoy this bonus episode of the podcast and my conversation with author Ian Morgan Cron. Ian, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you.
It's my delight. Thanks.
Hey, your book, as we were talking about before we hit record, really spun me around. Well written, funny. Like I really value humor, and I loved it. And I kind of, to be honest with you, because it's been out for a couple of years, I thought it might have been overhyped. When you just all your friends are telling you about a book, not at all. I went out and bought 10 or 12 copies after I finished reading it and gave them to all my friends for Christmas and family and staff and that kind of stuff. But for the uninitiated who hasn't heard about The Road Back to You or the Enneagram, there must be 3 people left on the planet. Can you give us a brief overview of what the Enneagram is and why you and your colleague Suzanne wrote The Road Back to You?
So the Enneagram is an ancient personality typing system that teaches there are 9 basic personality types in the world, one of which we all gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way of coping and navigating this big world of relationships. And each of those 9 types has an underlying motivation that powerfully influences the way that type thinks, acts, and feels, and describes each of those types or accounts for each of those types' worldviews. And it's a very powerful tool for developing self-understanding and self-awareness. And Suzanne and I both felt like it was time for a primer, an introduction to the Enneagram, because most of the books about it are content-rich, but very dense and very long.
Right.
And we thought, how do we make this accessible to a person, who doesn't have time to, they'd have to quit their day job in order to figure this out? How do we put it out there in a way that's simple and easy to access? And I mean, it was a difficult task, but we got through it.
Well, mission accomplished. I mean, it's readable, understandable. What got you and Suzanne interested in the Enneagram? Like, how did this fascinate? Has this been something that's been part of your ministry / life for decades?
Yeah, I actually was first introduced to the Enneagram in seminary in the 1990s. And, I attended a few workshops. I read some books on it, but, my life was going in a million different directions, and I didn't have the time to throw myself into it. But when I became an empty nester, and my life was expanding in different directions, I returned to it. And I realized at one point, gosh, no one has written on this topic for a long time, in particularly in the faith-based sphere. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, we got to throw our hat in that ring, because everywhere I went, I kept hearing people talk about their Enneagram numbers, and I kept thinking, there's no book. So, off we went.
Well done. So just for those who may be fairly new to it, dissect me for a second. All of my friends who started getting into this, free, cheap therapy. Okay, Ian? Deal?
Sure, yeah. Sure.
All right. All my friends who have been getting into this before me, I was a late adopter. They're like, Newhoff, you're a 3 or a 7. That's just who you are. You're a 3 or a 7. So performer, or what's a 7 called again? You've got that down.
Yeah, sure. So they're called the enthusiasts, and you 8s are called the challengers.
Yeah. So when I took the test, I came out as an 8. And when I read the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm an 8. And I had my close staff, the people who've worked with me for a long time, are texting me going, you're definitely an 8, you're an 8, you're an 8. Which was interesting because it felt a little bit like a report card where I might get in trouble at home. When I came out as an 8, not the fun-loving 7 or the performer who's a 3. But if you can explain just like, what is a person like me? What are we like? What's an 8? And then we'll do a brief overview of all of the personality types.
Sure. Well, 8s are called the challengers because they're often blunt, notoriously blunt,
yes,
forceful, domineering, authoritative people who are larger than life presences when they walk into a room. I mean, you guys just radiate power and strength, and really gusto for life. That's the best word I would give for it. You just have a lot of gusto. 8s often don't realize, however, that they are as intimidating to other people as they are. They don't really know how big their guns are, And so, part of the journey for them is learning to monitor and self-regulate all that power, And when it's used in the right way, at the right time, for the right reasons, that power is awesome and wonderful. When it's not, it's best just to keep the kids away from people like you.
Exactly. It was it's funny. It was, as I was reading through the chapter, I'm resonating with every line, including some weird stuff I'd never heard anybody say before. So, the thing about, the not being aware of your own presence or your power, or the air changing when you walk into your room, took me back to a conversation that I hadn't thought about in decades. When I was 19 or 20, I was in college, in university, undergrad, liberal arts. And I remember sitting around with some friends of mine at the time, and they said, Carey, when you walk in the room, the atmosphere changes. I'm like, what?
The balance of power shifts. So it's like they used to say about Frank Sinatra, who was an 8, and he was a little guy. And by the way, my mom is an 8, my mother is an 8, and my daughter is an 8. So I have a lot of experience with 8s.
Right.
So, they used to say about Sinatra that they said you could feel Frank walk into a room 15 minutes before he got there.
Wow. What is that?
Well, I mean, part of it is, a bit of a defensive strategy, right?
Uh-huh.
Every type, as I mentioned, has an underlying motivation, right? So for the 8, it's to assert power and strength over the environment and people in order to mask vulnerability and weakness that really lays at the center of their person and really at the center of all of us, right? Mm. But an 8 worries about betrayal and about others controlling them. And so in a preemptive way, their messaging, don't mess with me, I'm in control. And, if you're aware of that, you can mitigate some of the problems that could come with it. If you're not, you're on autopilot and just, out there operating without enough self-awareness to prevent yourself from banging guardrail to guardrail through people's lives.
Isn't that interesting? And of course, we'll get into this as the conversation continues, but there's a difference between a healthy 8, what you call an average 8, and an unhealthy 8. And in the case of 8s, it's as radically different as, healthy 8 could be Martin Luther King Jr., and an unhealthy one would be Stalin.
Yes.
Liberating people or murdering people, right? Like that is the difference between health and and ill health. But self-awareness is such, and I think that's the thing I love so much about the Enneagram, because I'm passionate about self-awareness, emotional intelligence. But like, one of the great puzzles for me about 10, 15 years ago was I kept having team members around me say, man, you can be so intimidating. And I think of myself as, no, I'm just one of the crew. And one of the nicknames of the woman who was then our executive director of operations, she gave me the nickname Bam Bam. Remember the Flintstones?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And she said, you don't know your own strength. Like, to me, it's just a point. It's like, I just made a point. And no, you just steamrollered over everybody in the meeting. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I just said a few words, but apparently killed everybody.
So I think the big gift of the Enneagram is self-understanding. And that's a prerequisite for self-awareness, which I would define as the ability to see in real time the effect your personality has on other people, and to observe, and then, to use this word again, regulate your personality so that you're able to communicate and function in the world at the healthiest level, to be the best expression of yourself.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you open up the book with that quote from Augustine, "Grant, Lord, that I may know myself, that I may know thee." It's a variation of what Calvin said, without knowledge of God, there's no knowledge of self. Without knowledge of self, there's no knowledge of God.
Yes. And of course, sadly, the church and at large has largely forgotten that teaching. And so one of the things that I have been most excited about is seeing a revival of people wanting to understand themselves better, not in a way that's navel gazing, but really that's in service to advancing the redemption program of God in the world. And so that to me is thrilling.
Well, one of the other things, then we'll move on to some other things, but as an 8, when it was the only line I recall you saying, what did you say? You would listen to Nickelback every single day for a year if you would reread this line, and it was simply, 8s do not need to be in control. They simply don't want to be controlled. And I thought, oh my gosh, you have been inside my head for most of my life. Because I've said that in meetings and with people, and I've thought about moves I had to make. And actually, as somebody who is not the lead pastor anymore, 3 years ago, we navigated the succession. If there is one thing my successor and I had to work on over and over and over again, and Jeff did this extremely well, but I just realized that was the dynamic underneath. It's like, I don't need to be in control. I just don't want to be controlled. And he has done a masterful job of leading me and giving me the freedom I need to continue to teach at the church without being a destructive force, but hopefully a constructive one. But I thought, man, it was just so perceptive. And I've had, like many people listening to this podcast, I've had many, many personality assessments done. That was the first one to name that. I thought you phrased it really well.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. I think, my experience with 8s is that the idea of being at the mercy of somebody else, to being underneath the power of another, is just anathema. I mean, they just resist it to the max. You push against authority all the time to make sure that they know that, you're here, you're in charge, or, if they want to be in charge, they better earn it. Right. And so, you guys are wonderful. I mean, eights can be the most, when they're healthy, I think the most popular number of all types.
Really? What do you mean by that?
You're just a blast. I mean, you're unedited. You're loud and fun, and you just, if think of it this way, most numbers on the Enneagram run on 120 volts. We got that normal little plug with the 2 prongs, right?
Yeah.
And you guys have, that plug behind your dryer with the big
the giant
thing
one.
Every time you plug it in, you're like, okay, kids, get out of the house. I'm not sure what's going to happen. It's like, that's 240 volts, right? And that's what you guys run on. You just have this. You have more energy than any other number on the Enneagram, more by far.
Isn't that interesting? And that's been true in my life. I had like 3 jobs in high school and multiple careers, and like I'm interested in everything. And the healthier I've become, my last book, Didn't See It Coming, is all about sort of the journey to health as a leader, as a human being. But the healthier I've become, the more fun I've become. But the people around me would know the destructive side of an 8 too, particularly in my younger years.
Yeah, I mean, again, what the Enneagram teaches, and we can hit on this when we perhaps talk about the sort of the spiritual side of the Enneagram, which is that what's best about you is what's worst about you, and what's worst about you is what's best about you. It just all depends on which side of the coin you want to play, and so and so you have to, I'm always reminded, to develop that inner witness that can watch what you're doing as you're doing it, right? And so that you're able to go, you're able to see the red flags that you're beginning to deteriorate in your health and awareness. And when that happens, all bets are off. And that's true for every number, right? You just start devolving into the worst expression of who you are slowly over time. And by the way, when we talk about average, healthy, unhealthy, that in the course of a day, you're going like this, you're spiking up and down, so at any given moment, I could have a call, and right now, I think I'm probably in an average space, I'm guessing. But I could get a call in an hour from now that makes me plummet, onto the worst side to me. And in 2 hours, I could have an interaction or something I read could spike me way up into the healthy range. So, it's all about real time monitoring and regulating, and to the point that eventually you don't have to really think about it as much. You're just in the right space, and the spikes and the roller coaster ride becomes less intense and a little bit more evenly planed.
I think that's extremely helpful and very accurate. I mean, I have an advantage over many listeners. I've lived a couple more decades, but for me, the more aware I am of the blunt force of my wiring, the more I can regulate it, and the more I've craved over the decades, just people close to me who can say, "Hey, Carey, can I talk to you? You were way out of line in that meeting," or "You should have said more. Today you were a little bit blunted. Like where was that spark? You seemed disengaged." And that's been really helpful to me. Well, so people can find themselves in the story. Can you give us a thumbnail of the 9 numbers so that people will recognize the people they love, or maybe themselves in it? And by the way, we'll link to this in the show notes, but I blogged on this a month ago, and I know when we were recording this, but we've had thousands of listeners and leaders already take the free assessment that you have on your site. So we'll link to that so you can do this in detail. And it was a really helpful assessment. What was it? ExploreYourType.com is
Yes. And actually, by the time this releases, I'm not sure if that will still be up, because we've just inked a deal with a company for an assessment that's far more comprehensive and delivers. It gives a much longer. It gives a 44-page report. So it's not it's pretty comprehensive, and we're using it a lot with corporate clients as well as faith-based clients. But it's a good little tool, and but I will say that the best way to really learn your number is not through an assessment, but by reading a book or attending a workshop. I mean, it by far and away, because the problem with self-report assessments is that they can't tell whether or not the person taking it is self-aware enough to give accurate answers.
Right. But when the people you've worked with for a decade are texting you going, "You're an 8, you're an 8, you're an 8," you're probably an 8. And when you read it and you read, does resonate with every line in the book, you're like, "Yep, I'm an 8. Yep.
So, by the way, eights are one of those numbers that it's fairly easy for them to know they're 8s. You know what I'm saying? Like they've had a long history of being an 8, but there are other numbers where it's less clear, or when, people have passed through seasons of suffering, or they've just gotten older, some of the edges of those personality styles blur a little bit. It takes a little bit longer. They soften, they're less stark. And so, for many types, myself included, it took me 10 months to figure out my type. And I'm a trained therapist. You think I would nail this. I've taken a lot of personality inventories, and I'm trained in them. And with the Enneagram, it took 10 months. However, it was well worth the wait and the study, because what it yielded was the kind of uncannily accurate description of my interior world, far better than any other assessment that I know.
And if I remember correctly, you're a 4. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. 1.
Sure. That's the perfectionists are 1s. These are people who are meticulous, hardworking, and reliable people who are motivated by a need to perfect themselves, others, and the world. 2s are warm, caring, and giving people, and they're motivated by a need to be needed and loved by others. 3s are the performers or the achievers, depending on who you talk to. These people are success-oriented, image-conscious. They have memorized David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like they are productivity hounds. They're motivated by a need to succeed or to appear successful and to avoid failure at all costs. 4s, they're the romantics, sometimes the individualists they're called, creative, sensitive, temperamental. They're motivated by a need to be unique and special. Lots of, I'd say a disproportionate number of artists and creatives fall into that space. 5s, the investigators, analytical. Good. The most analytical number on the Enneagram. They are somewhat detached and very private. They're motivated by a need to gain knowledge, to conserve energy, and avoid relying on other people. 6s are called the loyalists. We think there are more 6s in the world than any other type. It's speculation.
Isn't it like half the population, you said in the book?
I mean, again, it's speculative, but
right.
But I think there's evidence to suggest that there are more 6s than any other type in the world. They're committed, they're practical, they're down to earth. They are also worst case scenario thinkers who are motivated by fear and the need to feel safe and secure in an otherwise unpredictable world. 7s are the enthusiasts. I got a son who's a 7. I love them. They're fun, they're spontaneous and adventurous. They're motivated by a need to be happy, right? To plan and actually to really, that's the word, to plan and execute, right? In their pursuit of stimulating experiences and new ideas and the idea of an unlimited future, and it's all in service to avoiding uncomfortable feelings or pain. 8s, challengers, I already said this, commanding, intense, confrontational, right? They're motivated by a need to be strong and to assert control over the environment and others to avoid revealing weakness or vulnerability. And then finally, 9s they're called the sweethearts of the Enneagram. I'm married to a 9. They're pleasant, they're laid back, accommodating, go with the flow, don't rock the boat types, who are motivated by a need to keep the peace, to merge with the agenda and programs of another person or of a group. And the big one here is to avoid conflict at all costs.
And I thought my wife might have been a 9 when we were talking about this back and forth, and she's deep into the book right now. Okay,
so let me guess. If she's not a 9, she confused herself with being a 2.
Almost. She thinks she's a 5, and she has read through the 5, and yeah, she's, we've been together almost 30 years, married 28, dating 30. And she is still mysterious. There are layers. You tell the story of your good friend who's a 5 in the book, who, like, you know, all of a sudden you're 20 years into the relationship, you learn he has a sister he's never talked about, right? Now, that's not my wife's case, but there are parts of her I'm still learning. And she really identifies with that, which is interesting.
So this actually raises a great point. And that is, we're all 9 numbers. You contain all 9 numbers, right? So if you try to determine your type on the basis of characteristic traits or behaviors as they're described, you're going to be utterly confused. This is a mistake that most people make, which is, oh, I do this or I don't do that. And so here's the mantra I always tell people. It's not what you do that matters. It's why you do it. Which means you have to really read through all those underlying motivations I just articulated and figure out which one of those you most identify with, because it's the underlying motivation driving the traits and the characteristics above the waterline, right? It's what's under the waterline, the operating theme underneath the waterline that is responsible for what's happening above it. So you got to figure out what's underneath it, not what's above it. Base it on those underlying motivations, or you'll get lost in a ocean of all these characteristics and traits of each different type, and you'll relate to all of them. You'll get utterly confused, go right to the underlying motivations and figure it out from there.
Oh, no, that's good to know, because even the perfectionist thing, that line in your book about perfectionist is somebody who looks into a dishwasher someone else loaded and thought, how on earth could any human being have done this? It's 100% me. So I would say if there's another thing that I score, half the points on or whatever, it could be perfectionist. But I think you're right. There's a dominant style. And one of the points I really appreciate you making, your approach to the Enneagram, is you think a lot of this gets formed in childhood in response to either making sense of the world or like out of a wound or whatever. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, personality theory is very complicated, and it is hotly debated in all the different schools of psychology. There's not a lot of agreement about personality theory in the world of psychology. You're born with a certain temperament and disposition, right? It's genetics and biology. You came into this world. My daughter, who's an 8, right? Mm-hmm. She came into this world. I mean, you could just tell. Yeah. I mean, this kid was an 8. I mean, just had all that energy and forcefulness and drive and all those characteristic features of an 8, right? So disposition and temperament, that is never changing. It is immutable. You will never not have that disposition and temperament. That's not going to change. However, your personality is also made up of the responses that you had to environmental forces, family forces, cultural influences, et cetera. So we're a complicated soup, really, of things. And much of our personality is really made up of the adaptive stratagems that we came up with to get our basic needs met in life early on. We read the expectations that important people had of us, and we complied, And so all of that is in the mix here.
Let's put some legs on it. Type 3. So someone who would be, is it the performer is type 3? The performer, your dad was a 3, if I remember correctly in the book. And lots of my friends are 3s. So a lot of people who put a microphone on the weekend or to speak, they find themselves in that position, which is why I think a lot of my friends thought I was a 3. So the question then is, what would happen in, what are the things below the waterline that would drive a 3?
Sure. Well, there is this fundamental need to succeed. In order, really, if you get down to it, we all want to be loved, right? We all want to be approved. We all want to experience belonging. In the mind of a 3, they believe that the world only values others for what they do rather than for who they are inside. right? So when you have a belief like that floating around in your ecosystem, right, you're going to act upon it. You're going to say, what do I have to do to secure the love and the belongingness that I really want, my very basic needs? And you'll just start being a high achiever, right? Because you're thinking, I got to be successful or appear successful if I want to be loved and get my needs met. So, man, your life program, your happiness program becomes the achiever style in the world. And that's all very contextual, right? So it's not like every three wants to be a CEO of an investment bank or a well-known writer or speaker that's lauded on stage, and receives a lot of praise and recognition. You could be grow up in a family, a mafia family, and for you, success would be becoming the Don of the family, right?
Right.
So it's very contextual. It's not stereotypical. People tend to stereotype rather than type, and so it's not thinking you necessarily want to be Don Draper, from Mad Men, sort of an iconic three. It can give expression to itself in very, very different ways.
How does this show up in, let's start with work. I know you did a great podcast with Donald Miller, which we'll link to, where you kind of talk about all the different personality types. So if you want to go deeper on that, I think you spent about 5 minutes on each personality type there and just kind of work through them. But this can really make you a better leader, a better manager. And then we'll talk about it at home too in marriage. But talk about how this shows up at work.
Yeah. In fact, more and more, when I first began working with the Enneagram, I did a lot of faith-based sort of speaking engagements, and I love them. They're fantastic, right? But of late, I've spent a lot more time doing corporate work, right? Helping teams become more aware of the different gifts, the diverse range of talents that exist within their group based on each individual's type, and also helping CEOs and leaders more understand the people who work for them, to keep them engaged, right, et cetera, right? So yeah, every number on the Enneagram has a different communication style. They have a different work style. They have different assets and liabilities, one which has to be cultivated and the other one which has to be mitigated, right? So, it's a very powerful tool. And I'll tell you, the response from corporate work that I'm doing has been overwhelmingly positive. Let me give you an example of this. I did a workshop at a Fortune 500 company, and I came back a few months later, and I was in the hallway walking toward the HR person's office. It was a follow-up meeting. And I noticed that all the doors in the hallway had numbers that made no sense. Like I couldn't figure out where her office was because her office number, it was like everyone. And then later she told me, oh, those aren't the numbers of the office. Those are their Enneagram numbers. And she said, we put them up on all of our doors so that when people came in, they would be reminded, hey, this person doesn't see the world the way that I do. They're coming to this conversation with a whole different lens. And to take that into account, to bake it into your calculations when you're meeting with them. And she said, it has reduced conflict enormously. It has given people a new appreciation for what they bring to the table. It's helped us in placement. It's helped us with engagement. I mean, the list goes on and on. And it is because, and I love things like the Myers-Briggs. I love the Hogan. I love the Strong Campbell inventory. I could give you, a disc, all that stuff. I love it. They all have a lot. But I don't know a more accessible and accurate or more accurate instrument than the Enneagram for helping people right out the gate figure this stuff out. I like, for example, the Myers-Briggs. I was trained in the Myers-Briggs in graduate school. I still don't actually know what it is.
No, I know. Everyone's like, I'm an ENFP. I'm an INTJ. It's like, good for you. What do I do with that? I don't know.
Right. And so the Enneagram is so descriptive and so narrative in the way it describes people, that it's easy, it's accurate, frankly, it's fun. It's incredibly revealing, sometimes to the point of being uncomfortable, in the way that it paints a picture of who we are. I'm just so excited about how it's changing corporate cultures when I'm going in. And so each type, as I said, different ways of communicating and different ways of operating in workspaces. So I can go through the numbers. It would take a little bit. I mean, you heard.
We've got time. We got time.
Done. But one of the things that I try and do with leaders is talk them through the do's and don'ts of managing each of these types.
Well, I was just going to say, are there certain types that shouldn't work together? But let's take your track instead. I think that's a good one.
No, but let me just answer that question. The answer is no. And it's the same answer I give to people when they ask, are there certain types that shouldn't marry each other?
Yeah, that was the next question. It's like, hey, 2s and 8s, it's over.
Nope. If it really depends on the health of each of those numbers. So if you have a healthy 4 and a healthy 8, they can be dynamite together, right? To the degree that their health, there's a gap between health and unhealth in those two numbers. The greater that gap becomes, the greater the problems become, right?
But unhealthy people always create problems. I mean, regardless of your number, right? Yeah.
Totally. So if both types are healthy and are helping each other be healthy, by the way, because they have this language of the Enneagram now to talk and recognize unhealth and then talk about it when they see it evidenced in another person. Well, talk about efficiencies getting greater and a happier, more harmonious work environment. And, it's fantastic, right? So
walk through those numbers, because I think this will be interesting. There's so many leaders, so many workplace people here, whether it's in the faith space or the business space, who are like, okay, so I'm an 8 working with a 1. What does that look like? Or, a 6. Right.
I'll walk you through some do's and don'ts. Okay? Yeah. So if you're working with a 1, leverage their incredible talent these people they're the first people to spot the mistake.
These are perfectionists.
Right? They when they're really healthy, you could call them the improvers. They can improve on anything, right? And so they value clarity. You need to keep this in mind. They want to know exactly how a job should be done, and they need deadlines and structure. They like protocols. They like rules. They don't like people who bend the rules, right? They don't ask them to cut a corner, right? So you don't want to allow a 1 when a 1's not in a good space. They'll procrastinate. They'll start putting off projects for fear they won't do them perfectly from the outset. Right. So it's like if they write a book, you get around a 1 who's a writer, right? They get stuck on the first sentence forever because it doesn't sound like William Faulkner. You know what I'm saying? They want it to be that from word go. They don't believe in a rough draft, right? It's got to be perfect. And they procrastinate then or get stuck. So you have to keep reminding them, it's okay if you make mistakes, right? It's okay. That's how we all work. And, that gives them some oxygen. For 2s, these are the most interpersonal, relational people on the Enneagram. And so you need to put them in places where they get a lot of people contact. These are great customer service people. You want to have a front line too around there somewhere. But they also have trouble saying no to people. They're the ones who wander the hallways and are in conversation with every single person that they come across, right? And sometimes you got to tell them, I want you to keep doing that because that is your work style. But at the same time, at some point, you got to sit down and write the report. You just can't be wandering around socializing with people, even though that's their superpower, right? You want to put that to work, right? You definitely do not want to put a 2 in a back office where they have no contact with people. They'll dry up and die and blow away. I'd say with 3s, you want to. These are people who have to win. and they desperately want to win and cross that finish line first. You have to give them rewards. You got to offer promotions. You got to give them clear performance targets and success measurements. They don't like this feeling that I'm not quite sure what success looks like, in this job.
Right.
They want it to be clear. And so, but you got to be careful with them, because in order to win, sometimes they'll cut corners and sacrifice quality, right? If they're very unhealthy, they may do things that are borderline unethical or downright unethical in order to secure the win or appear like a winner. And like an 8, see, this is probably why they confuse you with the 3. That often happens, is they'll run over coworkers on the way to the goal line. Gotcha. You know what I mean? And they'll just knock people down because they're like, the goal line is like throwing a dog for a bone. You know what I'm saying? Like it's going to knock over the lawn furniture in order to get to it. So 4s, honestly,
those are the romantics.
They're the romantics. And again, as I said, disproportionately represented in the artistic community. I just did a corporate event or corporate training for one of the largest record labels in the world. And, there were only a very small number of 4s in the room. I meet very, very few 4s in corporate settings, really. It's just, unless it's in the creative world.
So writers, artists, that kind of thing. Yeah,
writers,
creatives.
Artists, dancers, floral arrangers. I mean, these are people who have just an amazing amount of feeling and a sense of aesthetics. That's their superpower, right? So we need these people. They're the poets and the songwriters of the world. I meet a lot of 4s in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live, or 3s who dress like 4s because they think that's what an artist should look like.
But they're performers.
Yeah, exactly. But, for them, they need an environment where they can express all that creativity and that aesthetic sensibility, their distinct style. They need to know that you understand and respect the unique way they have of seeing the world. And they just need to know that you hear them and you're listening to what they're offering. And they'll be okay if you decide you don't want to go in their direction, so long as they know you heard them and understood them. And I'm just giving you these are little teeny. I mean,
but it's good. Yeah,
these are just aspects of each of these personalities, but they're not. This is in no way comprehensive, right? With 5s, good Lord, just
my wife, the investigator, also another longtime associate of mine, is a 5. Yeah.
So, the best thing to do if you're, like, say, managing or working with a 5 is you give them a project, tell them when it's due, and let them get it done however and wherever they want to do it, right? So I told recently a company, and you can't make this stuff up. So I'm at the label, right? I go, how many 5s do I have? 3 or 4 people raise their hand. And I said, let me guess, you're in research and analytics, aren't you? And they all nodded.
My wife's a pharmacist and a solicitor. Loves the thought process.
Okay, so you can't make this stuff up, right? If you had told me that your wife was like in some other field, I mean, sometimes you can really almost name the fields that they gravitate towards.
So you're not surprised a pharmacist and a lawyer who basically loves contracts?
Oh, no. But now I would also say I meet a lot of pharmacists and contract lawyers who are 1s. And if you think about it, you'd like to have your pharmacist or, your heart surgeon be a 5 or a 1.
Oh, right? I got to tell you, she almost never makes mistakes. But on the days where she thought she did, that's a tough night at home.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because 5s hate to appear incompetent or unprepared.
There you go. Bingo.
Right? And so,
yeah.
And 1s do for different reasons, for a different underlying motivation. That's the key, right? So you can see similarities there. This is why those underlying motivations are so important to dig up.
But this is so funny because my wife being a 5, we met in law school. She went to the solicitor side, the contract side. I went immediately to the courtroom. It's like, throw me in court. Let me go beat someone up. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, right. You want to be a litigator.
I do. Right? I want to be a litigator, 100%.
Yeah, I want to go out there and kick some butt,
Yeah, I can smell your weakness.
But you'll also meet a lot of 8 lawyers who might be social justice advocates, who, because eights are very, very concerned about the underdogs, defending the voiceless, being people that are out in the world, giving a voice to those who feel marginalized and voiceless. And that's just a feature of their lives. So they make powerful advocates for the poor, for people that society forgets.
Martin Luther King Jr. was an 8.
Great example. Yeah, I mean, I think he was an 8. Again, I don't know what was the underlying motivation of his behaviors, but he appears to have the hallmark features of an 8. So, by the way,
so 5. We're back to 5. Yeah, I derailed you, but thank you.
I just think with them, I told a guy in a corporate setting I had a bunch of 5s. I said, listen, you don't need to, I mean, sure, you should, but give them cash as a bonus at year's end. But if you really want to make them happy, give them more autonomy. Let them work from home where they don't have to feel drained by all the relational or social demands that being in let's say a corporate setting would place upon them, right? A 3 wants to be in that glass office, and the corner office with the best view, right? Where everybody can see how successful they are. The 5 would like you to put them in an office somewhere in the basement where they're hard to find and where they can, pile all their books and research and ideas and just, immerse themselves in gathering and hoarding knowledge up, right? And just sucking as much of it as they can into their system. They're bottomless, really, for that stuff. So, I would say, with 5s, give them privacy, respect it. I'd say, give them, as I said, project dates when they're due. Make sure you don't call meetings at the last second that don't have much of an agenda. They hate them. Don't ask, whatever you do, don't ask them to give a toast spontaneously at the Christmas party because they'll die. Don't feel insulted when they leave the Christmas party earlier than everybody else. It's not personal. It's just that they've run out of relationship gas. You know what I'm saying? They've just started to shut down. They just don't have as much of those resources as other people do. And they need solitude, and because that's where they really recharge. That's where they recharge. All right, 6s.
6s, loyalists.
Oh man, I'll tell you what they bring to the table in a corporate setting is they're the first one to see what could go wrong in the plan, right? And so sometimes 6s, if they're not careful, because they have their worst case scenario thinkers, they can feel a little bit like a wet blanket for people who are like 3s and 7s and 8s who have big ideas and they just want to go take the hill and they're just willing to take risks. And the 6 will raise their hand and go, excuse me, has anyone thought about what would happen if we pursued the course you're describing and, we ran out of cash? We should wait until, next quarter, third quarter of next year. And everyone in the room just goes,
yeah, all the air's out, and you're like, well, you're fired if you're unhealthy.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But I tell people all the time, and I have to tell 6s how to do it, but, every company needs a loyal devil's advocate.
And these people are loyal. It feels disloyal if you're a certain personality, but they're extremely loyal, and they're actually trying to have your back. Is that the argument?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about 6s is, like I always tell married people who are married to 6s, I say, when they say I do, they mean it. Like you're going to have a heck of a time getting to undo the I do, We all need people in our lives, particularly aggressive types like 3s, 7s, and 8s, who can tap our brakes and say, slow down a little bit. Think through the consequences of what you're proposing. See the broader landscape and understand that this has implications that could be dire, right? Consequences that are dire if we just go into this without a whole lot of thinking, Right. So that's fantastic. The only thing is if you're managing one, you got to watch out for analysis paralysis, because they tend to have trouble making decisions because they're thinking through all that can go wrong. And so they can end up paralyzed by fear, right? And anxiety.
And what do they do well? They're good, like insurance people. They're good analysts. Risk managers.
How about risk management? Gosh, if you definitely want a 6 that, has got their eye on what could go wrong, right? Forecasting, right? I might just go on and on. I would say that most types could do any job when they're healthy, but they'll just gravitate towards certain types of jobs, or they won't last long in certain kinds of jobs if they're a mismatch with who they fundamentally are at their core, right?
True.
And let me give you an example of that with 6s. I had a client of a big company, and they had a person on their senior management team who had been there since the company's inception. And the CEO was watching this person really deteriorate in their job performance and couldn't figure out why until I helped him realize that this person was a 6. And that person was incredibly loyal to that CEO to the point that they weren't able to question or push back against them in the way that they wanted that person to.
Wow.
And they were, and also because 6s, there's a bit of resistance to change, and so this person wasn't able to get on board as the company moved from being analog to digital, right? And it was wonderful to watch how this person, this CEO was an 8, his heart really went out to this person, and we helped them really see that the best thing in that moment was to move on, to transition away. And they just celebrated and gifted this person going out in the most wonderful way, when if they hadn't known the Enneagram, it could have been a terrible tearing away.
Isn't that interesting? I don't want to camp a lot on it, but as you're talking, a couple of, and this could be totally wrong-headed, but having started in 3 very traditional churches that needed a lot of change, and I know there's thousands of leaders listening right now who are trying to transition small, dying, plateaued organizations, namely churches, or maybe it's a company or whatever. Do you find that when a church doesn't do well for a long time, it's usually the loyalists who are left and that they're neurotic about change? I'm just thinking through my first 5 years of leadership going, gosh, I wonder how many 6s were in the room. Because what you're describing just sounds like that.
Well, remember, they have a real need a couple things. Number one, 6s are very fixated on authority figures. Because to feel safe and secure, they see the authority figure as the key, right? Like if the right authority figure is going to make sure I'm safe and secure. So frankly, I see a lot of what I would say are, well, let's just say this across the board. What accounts for the rise of fundamentalism in multiple religions around the world? Well, we live in an increasingly dangerous, what feels like and is in many ways, a dangerous, unpredictable, unsettled world. And so those people are going to look to authority figures to provide them with answers in a sense that all shall be well, right?
Oh, wow.
And so, or political figures for that matter, without naming names. And so, they might be some of the last people left in that church, and they might be the most fearful about, well, that's not how we've done it before. And, that makes me feel less safe and secure. They love they like rules and protocols and predictable patterns of operation in the world. And so now, once you get them on board with change, once you answer all their questions, and they'll have a million questions to the point that it'll make you want to pull your hair out. But once you answer all of them and you've respected those questions, they're with you, man. And they will be with you. They are all the way in. But you have to be patient and move them along at the pace that they can, at a pace of change that they can sustain comfortably. really.
So impatient 3s, 7s, and 8s, listen up, right? That's really important.
Okay, so you see how, and I know tons of pastors who are 3s, 7s, and 8s, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of church planners who are 7s too, a lot of times. So, I would say if you know that, it changes everything.
It does.
Like you will have first of all, you'll have more compassion. You'll have more empathy. You'll see a better path toward where you want to get, right? You'll create less collateral damage in the community. Inadvertent, mistakes that because you thought everyone saw the world the same way you do. And I will say that I think the biggest mistakes senior pastors or CEOs make in life, or everybody can make, but particularly those people, is presuming that your way of seeing the world is normal.
Correct.
Because if you read, for example, if you look at the Enneagram, if you run by that model, you'll understand that there are 9 normal ways of seeing the world, and yours is just one of them. And if you don't take into account all the other 8, you're at a great disadvantage.
So I know we're not quite running out of time, but we're nearing the end of it. 7s, 8s, and 9s, do's and don'ts.
Yeah, sure. I'll go a little quicker. All right. So 7s, these are great starters, man. They are incredibly creative, energetic, optimistic. They're the first person you want to see when you arrive at the office every day. They can identify patterns and trends and how they overlap in a way that other people can't. You want to make sure that you give them a big job description, wide berth. You want to make sure you don't try and keep them in the same job over the long haul, because if they get bored, they just start to get in trouble, right? They need a lot of spontaneity, multifaceted days, and real encouragement to stay on track. Otherwise, they're distractible and start to flit around a little bit. And but great people to have on your team, but not always the best managers. Oftentimes this happens. Let's say with a pastor or a CEO, they get something going and they're awesome at it. Trust me, they're awesome. They just fire people up. They're inspiring, right? But when people start having to report to them, and their attention's all over the place, and the idea of being trapped in a job where they got to give 360s over and over and over again. You know what I mean? It's just like,
yeah. You
got to move them on to another startup inside the corporation you go say, okay, you got to go do something else now. You got 3 to 5 years in this thing, and then you got to move into something new. 8s, we've talked a lot about 8s. I would just tell you, 8s test authority. So you just got to be ready for it. You got to pony up and let them know if you're overseeing them, you better be strong enough to meet their energy and to convince them that you are a trustworthy leader that doesn't waffle on decisions. They don't give a lot of, grace to people who aren't ready to charge forward.
Right. And blunt is okay. I mean, I've said that to my team many times. Like, I want the truth. That is my love language.
Right. Okay. But you also have to understand that the amount of calories other types have to expend to be blunt is far greater than the amount of calories it takes for you to be blunt. Right. And so again, that gives you the ability then to extend compassion and patience to other people who you see as being different from you. And let's face it, we all need these inflated egos of ours to be right-sized from time to time.
Yes, we do.
And one of the things the Enneagram does is help us realize I'm another bozo on the bus. I just have another set of glasses on. That's all, And so my way of seeing the world is not the only way. And if someone's is different than mine, that doesn't make them dumb or, at some level, out of their minds. It just means that they bring a different angle of understanding to different situations and relationships that has to be taken into account, right? Yeah. So anyhow, let's move on to 9s, because we've said a lot about this, right? All right, these are, like I said, these wonderful laid-back human beings. They're peacemakers in the workspace or at home or anywhere. These are the best mediators around, because they can bring all sides to the table. They can carve deals, man. They they bring harmony to a workplace that everybody needs. They tend to sell themselves short, though, and they have lots of skills, and they tend to undervalue them. They don't think their presence matters very much, or that they can affect a lot of change in the world, and so they tend to kind of, if they're not careful, they'll fade into the background and just begin to go along with what the group wants, rather than voice their own preferences, opinions, and assert themselves and make their presence known. And so you have to encourage them to really say, I'll say to the nines all the time, what do you think? Don't mirror back to me what I think or what the group thinks. I want to know what you think, because we need to hear your particular voice and take on these matters, And once again, for you, no problem. In fact, with an 8, I got to be like, okay, enough asserting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's enough. It's like, I've heard of 8s who have written on a sheet of paper, close your mouth, close your mouth, close your mouth. And I say that to myself. That's my self-talk. It's like, you've talked enough, be quiet.
Yeah. Well, that's self-awareness. You see, that's what that is right there. That's having enough self-awareness to recognize in the moment, okay, what's happening right now? Oh, I am falling into the autopilot of my personality. I'm not thinking and regulating and the excesses that my personality can take on. And when you can see it, you can do something about it, and everything gets better.
This is so good. I feel like we could go on for a day. I really do. This is so helpful. And this won't be the end of the story for me. We're running our whole team through this, and, I've given it to friends and family members, the whole deal. But one of the things I really loved, and it comes out in the book, even more so than maybe this conversation so far, but this is a spiritual discipline too. I mean, this has its ancient roots. Nobody's sure exactly where it came from, but, it's been used as a spiritual discipline tool. I want to close on that. So tell us a little bit of, this is not like, hey, I'm an 8, I'm large and in charge, get out of my way. It's not justification for ill health. It's spiritual progress. How does that work? And do you want to say something about that?
Sure. So you actually referenced it in the beginning of our conversation, that self-knowledge and knowledge of God are inextricably linked to one another, right? So I think the Enneagram reveals in its 9 types the nature and the character of God, right? So let's think about this. 1s represent, I think, in the world, the goodness of God. 2s, the love of God. 3s, the glory of God. 4s, the pathos and the beauty of God. 5s, the wisdom or the omniscience of God. 6s, the unfailing loyalty of God. 7s, the joy of God. 8s, the power and the justice of God. And 9s, the peace of God, right?
Wow.
This is why all of us contain all of these numbers or pieces of these numbers, because we're made in the image of God, right? You happen to have more strength in that realm of power and justice than I do as a 4. I tend to probably be more gifted in areas of artistic expression, in beauty, in service to what God's up to in the world. Now, as a spiritual discipline for me, that means I want to make sure that my superpowers are being used in service, not to the advancement of my ego, and in service to my agenda of protecting myself or manipulating others to do what I want them to do for my sake, right? Oh, and also I'd say, how do I begin to intentionally, consciously rely on or tap into those other types? They're the gifts those other types have, right? How do I develop them in myself so I'm a more holistic person? I'm not just Johnny one note 4, right? I can, have access and see, well, in this moment, I need to adopt some of the postures of a 9, or in this moment, a 1, or in this moment, a 6. You begin to have this language and knowledge that helps you kind of move around in a way that gives you access to all these dimensions of who God is. I tell people this is crazy, I know, but if you want to know who God is, maybe one of your best primary reference tools is you. Because if you're made in the image of God, what better place to start to know who God is than with yourself?
Wow.
Right? So
yeah.
It's to me, I could go on and on about all the different ways that you can use this as a spiritual formation tool. And there's so many ways, but, I think it again and again, it begins with self-knowledge, and that's not navel gazing. It's not being self-absorbed. It's really learning about yourself so you can love other people better. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And I think, as I've grown in this, and even through the book, my assistant of the last decade is a 2. And at first we were radically different styles, but I've learned so much from her. And she's learned 1 or 2 things from me along the way as well. And it's one of those things where as you begin to see the diversity, it's really a body of Christ thing. It's self-awareness. Yes. Andy Stanley, I once heard him say that the self-righteous are rarely self-aware. I mean, I think this all links together, and it's a way for us to grow. So the book is called The Road Back to You. It's an Enneagram journey to self-discovery. Ian, this has been a great conversation. If people want to know more, where can they find out more online?
Sure. They can go to iancron.com. They can follow me on Twitter, let's say at Ian Cron, or on Instagram, Ian Morgan Cron. And, we have a bunch of new products we have coming out, this new assessment, among others, in January. And we're just excited. And because I have to tell you, Carey, there are very few things in life more satisfying than being able to make your living by doing something that genuinely helps other people. I mean, seriously, like that's a gift.
Yeah.
Like
it is.
You're like, holy smoke, people pay me to do this? I mean, that's like, it's like to get up in the morning and ask yourself in just an amazement that question, like, oh my gosh, like I can see that I am actually moving the needle in people's lives, and I get to do that for a living. So, that's so exciting to me.
I resonate that. I pinch myself most mornings. It's like, how do I get to do this? Like, this is just the craziest thing, and I actually enjoy it. It's pretty crazy.
I know, man. I know most people get up in the morning, they think, oh, I got to go to work. And I think, I get to go to work.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And that's a world
and to be able to
difference.
help leaders. Well, you've helped tens of thousands of people today with this episode, and so many more even with your book. So thank you so much. I hope this isn't the last conversation. It's been a rich one. Thanks, Ian.
Me too. Thanks for being a great interview for me.
Well, if you want more, there is more starting Sundays in January at Connexus Church. We hope you'll join us for our brand new series called Know Yourself, a shortcut to who you really are. It's a 3-part series where we talk about being made in the image of God, what happens when that image of God gets marred in you, and then how Jesus redeems you, all through the lens of the 9 different personality types of the Enneagram. We've also got a free test and a free copy of the book Road Back to You if you join us for week 1 of the series. Make sure you don't miss it. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on Sunday at Connexus Church. If you want to learn more, head to connexuschurch.com, where you can find all the information about the series and everything we do. And by all means, bring a friend with you.